My name is Shephal Doshi. I'm the Director of Cardiac Electrophysiology at Providence St. John's Health Center in Santa Monica and the Pacific Heart Institute. I am the co-national principal investigator for the PINNACLE FLX trial, which we will be discussing today. The device that we studied, called WATCHMAN FLX, is a next generation left atrial appendage occluder. The device that currently has been used since initiation of clinical trials is the same device that was developed in 2004. And so now with that current device, we have done over 100,000 cases and received FDA approval in 2015. So we have a lot of experience. And in terms of next generation device, the things that we were trying to improve on, one was the ability to close a larger variety of anatomies, meaning smaller appendages, larger appendages, different shapes, some that may be more challenging with the first generation device. And also trying to do the procedure more safely, that is, have less complications in terms of risk of bleeding, risk of perforation, a risk of any negative outcomes in the first 7 days. These are the things we looked at. So we want to look at efficacy, meaning being more successful at closing and not having a significant leak. And on the safety side, we wanted to make sure that while we achieved that efficacy, we also did it more safely than what we had done before. And that being said, the current device has been shown to be safe, has been shown to work well, but we wanted to improve on it since it is 15 years old technology. So this is a single-arm prospective non-randomized study, and the whole purpose of the study was to compare the WATCHMAN FLX to a performance goal based on the current generation WATCHMAN. So we know how this current generation WATCHMAN performs because we've done over 100,000 cases. We have data from multiple different studies in terms of the safety and efficacy. And so this device, we just decided the study would be this prospective design where we would enroll patients in this trial and we would compare their outcomes to the historical results based on the first generation WATCHMAN. It was a US IDE only study, so only centers in the US enrolled. And there were 400 patients in this study and over 29 centers in the United States. So the study had two primary endpoints. The first endpoint is a primary efficacy endpoint. That is, how successful we are closing the LAA and placing a device in there. And in those patients, what percentage of the patients had a leak less than equal to 5 millimeters, what we would consider a clinical success. So that was a primary efficacy endpoint. And this was looking at transesophageal echoes at 12 months. So that is at 1 year after you put the WATCHMAN in, what percentage of patients had a good closure, that is, no significant leak. That was the effectiveness endpoint. And then the primary safety endpoint was the occurrence within the first 7 days or time of discharge, whichever one was later, looking at mortality or all-cause death, ischemic stroke, systemic embolism, or any device or procedure-related events that required surgery. So the efficacy endpoint was 1 year success at adequately closing the appendage, and the safety endpoint was being able to be discharged and not having an acute event in that short or early time frame. So in regards to the secondary efficacy endpoint, which is the incidence of stroke and systemic embolism, this was pre-specified to be looked at 24 months. And currently, the trial has not had completion in terms of follow-up for 24 months yet because the data is still being collected. So we are only reporting the primary efficacy endpoint and the primary safety endpoint. So, I think a great outcome of the study is for us to better understand what patients will be the right patients for this device. And if you look at the current generation WATCHMAN, we know that in the clinical trials, 99% of patients had a good closure at 1 year. And this trial showed 100% of patients had a good closure at 1 year. So that part is great. Clearly, that is something that looks as good and, or if not better, than the first generation device. But what's really interesting is that if you look at the first generation device, the number of patients that actually had 100% closure, that is no leaks identified by echo, that was about 66%. In this trial, 90% of the patients had no identifiable leaks by echo. So from an efficacy standpoint, we clearly were better than our performance goal, but not only did we close it successfully, 90% had no leaks whatsoever. So to me, that would be beneficial for any patient who had appendage closure, actually getting the appendage closed with no leaks. The part where this study really stands out from my perspective is the safety part of it. There were two events out of 400 patients. Those two events were ischemic strokes. One patient had an unsuccessful implant, the other patient had a successful implant, and they both had strokes that had minimal new deficit for the patient. But 2 out of 400, that's 0.5%. There were no acute pericardial effusion, so there was no acute perforation and tamponade needing to go for pericardiocentesis or surgical procedure at the time. So if you had such excellent success at closing the appendage with no significant leak in 90%, at the same time, only 2% had a complication with no acute perforations, to me, this device would make sense for every patient who's getting appendage closure because you have added safety and you have improvement in the ability to adequately close the appendage. So, in terms of where we're going forward looking at research, this study was not designed to expand the indication, that is, look for new types of patients to close the appendage. What this study does, it expands the treatment population, that is, the patients who qualify for appendage closure that you may not have done because the appendage was too small or too big, or the shape was too complicated where you were concerned about perforation, where it wasn't as deep as you would like it to be. This device allows you to more successfully and safely close those appendages that you may not have done or may not have qualified for appendage closure based on their anatomy. And I think that makes a huge impact. A lot of physicians, get uncomfortable when the anatomy is very challenging for obvious reasons. They're worried about complications and whatnot. So what the study does is allow you to do those patients more safely. But in terms of expanding the indication, that is, finding out new patient criteria that would justify or that would be positive from a patient perspective as another alternative using this device than taking blood thinners, we need to do further trials to see what other patients we could enroll and what patients we could actually implant the left atrial appendage where it would show a benefit for them or be at least be equivalent to blood thinners. And those trials are currently being designed. The one major trial that is being designed and currently being submitted to the FDA is called Champion AF, where I'm one of the national co-principal investigators. And in this trial, we will be randomizing patients to this WATCHMAN FLX device, which has been shown to be safe and effective in closing appendage. And we're going to randomize these patients to direct oral anticoagulants or DOACs. So the standard of care in this country for all patients with AF is to take an anticoagulant. And typically it's the novel ones or the newer ones called direct oral anticoagulants. And what this study will do is to compare patients head to head with the standard of therapy, which are these specific blood thinners, versus WATCHMAN to see if there is a benefit to placing these devices, or are these devices even as good as, so patients could safely get this procedure and have the same benefit they would have gotten from blood thinners. So these trials are being designed, and we hope that we can begin enrollment in the next calendar year. These will be multi-center, thousands of patients, anywhere from 2 to 3 years of follow-up. But I think these will answer the big question. That is, right now we're implanting these devices in patients who we think shouldn't be on blood thinners long term. The next answer will be, can we do this in all patients who are taking blood thinners? Is this therapy as good as or better?